Welcome to Veteran Resource Podcast, where you will meet nonprofit organizations focused on improving the lives of veterans and their family members. Here is your host, Jeremy Paris.
Welcome, everybody, to episode 71 of the Veteran Resource Podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy Paris. I want to start off by apologizing if the sound isn't perfect for this episode. I'm in a hotel room in Sedona, Arizona, and if you have not seen this area, you should put it on your calendar, carve some time out of your schedule, and check this place out. It is so cool. So for this Veteran News Tuesday, we have an article that was given to me by Luis Congdon, who you might remember from episode 68. He shot me a message over and said, "Hey, you should check this out. I think you'll like this." And I read through the article, and he was right. It's pretty interesting. And the article comes from complex.com. It's titled, "How Video Games Are Helping Young Veterans Cope." Okay, so you probably remember back in episode 54, which was the end of last season, I spoke with Steve Machuga from stackup.org, who was talking about how video games saved his life. And it was a really good episode, so you might want to go back and listen to that one after this, because Steve Machuga was actually in this article, but he wasn't the main focus of it. The main focus of it was specialist Rob Gibson, who's 27 years old, and about 5 years ago, he came back from Iraq. And over the past 5 years, things have been pretty normal for him. He was outgoing, he'd hang out with friends, go to barbecues, things like that. But then back on the 4th of July, he had this panic attack. And then since then, he's been kind of having a lot of different symptoms of PTSD that have been getting worse and worse. And after talking to a specialist about this, they discovered that it came from a very minor car accident that he was in back in June. The car that hit him ended up fleeing the scene, and Rob took up a defensive posture and called 911 for help. The therapist feels like this kind of threw him right back into that feeling like he was in Iraq. So for the last few years, he's been repressing these feelings. He feels like everything has been good, but in reality, when you repress those feelings, eventually something could trigger it that could come back out. And so while therapy has been helping him, what he really found was that video games were one of the best things for him right now. And what he says is, quote, "I'd say that video games have really been kind of the only switch off for me, other than sleep, of course, and that's not really doing too good right now." So he's having trouble sleeping. He doesn't really want to go out where he's around people, so he's kind of isolated, but when he's playing video games, things kind of change for him. And the way that Rob puts it when he's talking about video games is that it's kind of nice because you focus on that other person for like 90 minutes. So for that time, he says, "I'm not Rob with PTSD. I'm that person in the game." He's outgoing in the game. He's vocal. He can lead a team. And it's just not something that he's getting in the real world right now while he's suffering through these issues. Now, the article goes on to talk about Skip Rizzo, who developed virtual reality exposure treatment, also known as VRET. Virtual reality exposure is almost exclusively being done through this simulation program called Virtual Iraq Afghanistan. And this was developed by Skip. And eventually, it was even funded by the military. And what this is it's kind of got the foundation of classic psychotherapy treatment, where you reconstruct the incident repeatedly until it's manageable for the patient. Through technology now, though, using virtual reality, you can make it seem even more real for the patient. As they're telling their story, you can kind of set up the virtual reality to mimic that story. And they go as far as to have a little machine that blows out smells of like truck exhaust or burning flesh or things like that really help the patient to go there in their mind and recreate what it is that they were going through. And by doing this repeatedly over time, these images that they have that they keep going back to, they lose their power to the patient. So if you're somebody who is suffering from PTSD right now, you might want to check into VRET and see if that's something that could be provided to you. See if that is something that you want to use in your treatment. And as I mentioned in the beginning, Steve Machuga of StackUp.org pops up in this article, and very briefly they go over what he said in great detail during episode 54. So again, I recommend you go back and you listen to that one. And what Rob Gibson leaves us with for this article is he's talking about the stigma that is still associated with getting help. How soldiers feel like they're soldiers and they should be strong enough to not need help. It's only because that stigma is there that soldiers aren't going out and getting the help that they do need. And Rob says, I don't think that it's bad to reach out for help. I think it's probably the most important thing I've ever done in my life. Rob has recently, since the article was published, he's been admitted to an inpatient treatment program that's going to go on for 7 weeks, I believe it was. And Rob seems very optimistic that this is going to help him. So Rob Gibson and I are encouraging you to seek the help that you need. And I also encourage you to go and read the entire article, and I will have a link to that in the show notes, which you can find at veteranresourcepodcast.com/071. And thanks, Luis, for sending this over my way. That's all I have for you today. I will see you tomorrow for episode 72, where I'll be talking with Amanda Patterson-Crow from In Gear Career. And it is a really, really good interview, so you're definitely going to want to check that one out. See you tomorrow.